Most businesses don't fail to achieve their goals because they lack ambition. They struggle because they lack focus. Now, I've seen leadership teams with really great visions and really big goals, even plenty of initiative, and yet they still get stuck. Why? Well, because often they don't have the right focus, or their focus is spread across many competing goals. And when everything is a priority, really nothing is. And that's why in EOS, we use a simple tool called rocks. So, rocks are the 3 to 7 most important priorities that your team must accomplish in the next 90 days. Not 37, 3 to 7. They are the critical few smart goals that actually move the business forward toward the long term vision. When teams commit to the right set of rocks, something really powerful happens. Your focus improves, accountability becomes clear, and teams start gaining traction. In this video, I break down what rocks really are, why they work so well, and how they connect your day to day execution to the bigger picture of your business. First, let's talk about why we call these 90-day goals rocks. It all comes down to prioritization. This idea was first presented by Vern Harnish in his book Rockefeller Habits, and then Stephen Covey in his book First Things First. And then they were adopted in practical application by Gino Wickman in Traction, and ultimately became a foundational tool of EOS. So the story goes like this. Picture that you have an empty jar sitting on your table. And next to that jar are a pile of rocks, a pile of pebbles, and a pile of sand. The sand represents all of the distractions that we have in life, jumping on your phone to check social media, or answering the door to talk to a salesperson, or taking that call that you really didn't need to take. This could also be the fires that we tend to react to. Pebbles represent all of our normal day to day activities, tasks that we need to get done, things like our day to day work roles that we have to get done every single day. But those rocks represent the most important priorities that if we got them done would move the needle in the direction of our long term vision. Pebbles and sand don't move the needle. They either maintain the status quo or distract us from what's really important. The problem is that many people and companies fill their jar with sand first, then the pebbles, and then ultimately they don't have any more room for the rocks, the biggest priorities. So those priorities go unfulfilled and the needle goes unmoved. So the purpose of rocks in EOS is to help leadership teams shift their focus on the most important priorities for the next 90 days. So why 90 days? So this gets into the psychology of rocks and ultimately the 90-day world of EOS. Human beings throughout our history have evolved to adapt to the seasonality of life. There are 4 seasons in every year. So deep in our human psyche, we are adapted to living in 90-day increments. The human attention span to goals is really only about 88 days. Even when I trained athletes as a triathlon coach, we would have a training build for a race. We call it a macro cycle that lasts about 12 weeks or approximately 90 days. So the 90-day world is an important concept in EOS, but more than that, an important concept in life. Within that 90-day world, during an EOS implementation, leadership teams will be executing on the most important priorities in their business, meeting weekly to hold one another accountable during their level 10 meetings. And then when those 90 days are up, they all come back together for their quarterly session where they do 3 things. First, they check in on how they did the last quarter. And then they realign around their vision and plan. And then they get together to set the most important 90-day priorities, their rocks, that will move the needle for the business toward that vision for the next quarter. That's the 90-day world. That's why it's so important. Clarity, alignment, and accountability. So let's talk about what rocks actually are and how to establish them. As I said, rocks are the 3 to 7 most important priorities for a person or a team. Again, not 37, 3 to 7. Your leadership team will agree upon and align around what those priorities are together. And less is more here. What can you get done in the next 90 days that will move your business forward? So when you set them, write them down and make them SMART. SMART means specific, meaning clear, not muddy. Then measurable, meaning you can assign a number to it. Then achievable, meaning not impossible. Relevant, meaning that it's aligned with your bigger picture goals. More on that in a moment. And then finally, that it's time bound, meaning there's a due date. When we have all of those, You will know what done looks like. And the second thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that everyone agrees it's the right rock. That way, everybody's aligned. And then you want to make sure that one person owns each rock, not more than one person, because if more than one person is accountable for a rock, then nobody's accountable. So, one note about rock ownership, it's important to distinguish between own versus do. Just because you own the rock doesn't necessarily mean you have to do the rock. It could very well be that you can delegate it out to someone else or you're in charge of it. You are just accountable to make sure that it gets done, however you define done. And so here's what rocks are not. It's important to distinguish what rocks are not, because this is a trap that a lot of leadership teams fall into. First, rocks are not to-do lists. They're not wish lists, things that you think you can get accomplished. Remember, they have to be achievable. They're also not vague aspirations like improve communication. They are clear, they move the needle, and they bring your bigger picture goals into the realm of short term achievability. So, using simple EOS framing, if it doesn't move the business forward in the next 90 days, it's not a rock, it's a pebble or sand or just noise. Another great thing about rocks is that they give teeth to accountability. Far too often, I hear leadership teams talk about one of their biggest frustrations being lack of accountability in their organization. Like they want to wave their hands and just make accountability happen. And that's just not possible. But what rocks do is it brings clarity to the actual priorities, ownership to those priorities. So someone is accountable to do it. So accountability comes to the surface. And it also gives a weekly rhythm to check in on those priorities. So even if you can't, quote unquote, hold people accountable, accountable people who are naturally accountable will thrive in this structure. Those who aren't accountable will probably fall off. And here's why that matters, because then accountability becomes objective, not emotional. You are either on track with your rocks or you're not. And it also creates a peer-to-peer accountability. When you're checking in on your rocks every week, there's more pressure to get those rocks done instead of just procrastinating until the last minute. And when those expectations are clear and individual peer-to-peer accountability improves, trust is also strengthened, and trust is the foundation of a healthy team. So now let's talk about the relationship between rocks and the bigger picture. When done right, rocks connect directly to your long-term vision. If you're wondering where to look to find the right kind of rocks, you can look at the following items on your VTO to see where the real priorities lie. First, your core elements, things like your core values, your core focus, and your core target. Looking here shows you where you're going in the long term. Where do you need to create alignment towards those core elements of your business? And are there rocks there? Second is the 3-year picture. You've painted a clear picture of what your organization looks like 3 years from now. Your leadership team has aligned around it. Now, out of those 5 to 15 bullet points that highlight what that looks like, what rocks can you establish that will move you closer to completing or achieving that 3-year picture? And then next would be the 1-year plan. You set your most important 3 to 7 goals for the year in your 1-year plan. Do you see the connection there? What are the next steps to achieve those goals in the next 90 days that can get you closer to achieving your 1-year goals? And finally, you can find rocks buried in your issues list. You know, those issues that keep coming up repeatedly, or those long-term issues that you keep kicking down the road. You have big issues in your business, and you're not alone. Every organization has issues. And those are the biggest challenges or the obstacles that are in your way of achieving your vision. So that's where you can find some rocks. That's where you also find some opportunities to improve. Are there any issues on your issues list that can become rocks? So be careful of shiny objects here. Sometimes things get thrown onto the issues list that are just shiny objects. They're distractions. They may be hiding pebbles or sand. Something may look like a needle mover in the moment, but it may just be a distraction. This is why before you get to your quarterly session, it's always good to have a clarity break and really think about the most important priorities in your business so that you come to that meeting prepared and you're not just frantically looking through these items through your issues list to find rocks on the spur of the moment. Otherwise, you get impulse rocks and not actual needle mover rocks. So the point is that rocks are how the long-term vision shows up in real life this quarter. It's how you move the needle forward. And if you're looking at the long road towards your big, hairy, audacious goal, your 10-year target is your destination. The rock is the next stretch of road to get you there. So if you do this right, rocks won't feel like just another thing to do. They will give you greater freedom because when rocks are clear, what you have is fewer distractions. What you have is the ability to delegate better. You also get out of the weeds. So let me just quickly summarize some of the common rock mistakes that people make. First off, I'll share that one of the things I just shared was that you come into a quarterly meeting unprepared. You haven't taken a clarity break. You don't have an idea of what those rocks are, and you're just trying to think of them on the fly. Rocks, those most important priorities, you can't think about them in the 5 minutes where you're writing down all the things. You're supposed to come into those quarterly sessions prepared, knowing at least a laundry list of what the most important priorities are, so that we should get something on the board that shows all of the most important priorities. Then we can narrow them down to what the absolute most things that need to get done are 3 to 7. That's it. And that brings up the second point. I say 3 to 7 because the second trap that many leadership teams fall into is that they set too many rocks. They set too many priorities. And when everything is important, then truly nothing is important. So I'll tell you, the best performing teams are usually great at identifying the critical few and knowing that less is more. Achieving 3 rocks that are really going to move the needle is way better than setting 7, 8, or 9 rocks for the quarter that maybe half of them get achieved, but they're not really moving the needle. That critical few is important. So the next mistake is that rocks are really just roles or to-dos or your job. Your job is not a rock. So think about this in terms of rock and roll, right? The rocks are the most important priorities that are going to move the needle forward. It's going to set a new standard. It's going to push you closer to your goals. Roles are those daily jobs that you're supposed to do. Those are pebbles. So if you're looking at your accountability chart and you're seeing a series of roles that are listed there, and maybe you're a CFO and you're saying and your one of your roles is to put out the financial reports every year, you shouldn't be setting a rock every year to say, well, I'm going to get the financial reports done. Why? Well, because that's your job. So set rocks that are going to move the needle forward, set a new standard, move you in the direction of your vision. So the next mistake that leadership teams make is that rocks are unclear about what done looks like. Sometimes when you're in the session room, you may think you've written them smart. You may think you know what done looks like. But when you really get to the meat of it, and when you get to the end of the next quarter, you don't know if it's been completed or not. So that's why it's really important to ask yourself, what does done look like for this rock? What is the measurable objective here? How will I know that I have completed this so that I could tell my team we are done? Then the next mistake leadership teams make is that some of the rocks are just shiny objects. Again, they're choosing shiny objects that are distracting them from the real priorities. Again, make sure you're really prioritizing. Make sure that everybody agrees that it's the right rock. Even on leadership team individual rocks, you want to ask the group, is there anything here that is distracting me from what is the most important thing? Is this truly the right rock for me? And you should get 100% thumbs up on that rock. Then the last mistake that leadership teams make is that they're being too hard on themselves and they're not learning. So in addition to rocks being an accountability tool, they're also a learning tool. This is really, really important. This is something a lot of teams miss because you're so focused on wanting to get things done, wanting to get to 100%, that you're missing the point about learning from what just happened. And perfection is a limiting belief. We're not calling for perfection. That's why in EOS, we're always focused on getting to 80%, not 100%. So ask yourself whether you're achieving your rocks or not, whether you've gotten to 100% or you've gotten to 50% rock completion. Ask yourself, what are you learning from them? Even if you've achieved 100% of your rocks, you should be learning from that. Why did you get all of your rocks done? Were you setting your standards too low? Were they the right rocks? Did they really move the needle forward? And if you got 50%, were you really prioritizing the right rocks? Were you really engaging in the right types of priorities? Learn the lessons every quarter when you're evaluating how you did on rock completion. Remember, it's not a competition. If you're setting rocks to achieve 100%, you are missing the point. I've had both occurrences where leadership teams have completed 100% of their rocks and they didn't move the company forward. I've also had leadership teams that have completed 50% of their rocks and they realized that they focused on the right rocks, and the 50% that they didn't complete were not important rocks. So just learn the lessons from setting your rocks. So when you learn to set rocks appropriately, what you're doing for your team is you're helping your entire team build a culture where you can stop reacting and then start prioritizing and executing. And that's a critical skill that's going to put you ahead of the competition and move you forward. Because truly, most owners don't have a vision problem. Visions are easy. Everybody can have a vision. Most organizations have an execution problem, and rocks help to solve that execution problem. So here's a final thought. EOS rocks are really simple. They're boring, and they work if you let them. So if you'd like help prioritizing the right rocks for your organization, I can help. Reach out to me and schedule a free 90-minute EOS workshop with your team to get you started on your EOS journey.